big news out of Delta today. The company says it could be overstaffed by as many as 7,000 pilots come this fall. They've got 14,000 pilots, so that's a big difference there. Phil LeBeau is in Chicago with all the details. Phil.
Hey, Melissa, we'll talk about the Delta story in just a bit, but I want to bring you up to speed on some news that just crossed within the last 15 minutes. Representative Peter DeFazio runs the House Transportation Committee. He has sent this letter to the CEOs of all the airlines, essentially saying, you know what? Keep the middle seat open. You say you were going to do it, now do it. He's troubled by the pictures he is seeing. He also wants the airlines to limit their capacity to 67% full. In other words, the planes would have 1/3 of their seats empty. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Now to the Delta story. It all ties in to whether or not these airlines can function profitably over the next couple of years. And when it comes to pilots, they've simply got too many at Delta. Today they said the 14,000 pilots are 7,000 more than they will need in the fall of this year. And oh, by the way, when you look at next year, they expect that by the third quarter of 2021, they will have 2,500 to 3,500 more pilots than needed. Remember, Delta is currently burning through about $50 million a day. And when you take a look at the airline stocks, they are all on pace for having just a horrific first half of this year. As a group, this is a group that right now burned through $10 billion in the month of April. They're all trying to bring that cash burn rate down, but it's being tough because they're really not booking many passengers. In fact, right now, their passenger loads down about 93% compared to where they were at the same time last year. And the ARCA Airline Index on pace for its worst year ever. So, Melissa, it will be interesting to see whether this letter from Representative DeFazio forces the airlines to keep those planes 2/3 full at max, because if that's the case, they're really going to struggle if, in fact, travel comes back later this year.
Is there any implications in the letter where DeFazio is asserting you should do this, operate at only 67% capacity because we loaned you money, we bailed you out?
He mentions the fact that they received a government bailout, but he also takes a swipe at the president saying, look, this was an ill-conceived plan in terms of how the airlines the bailout was structured for them. He does say, look, if you've got to raise your fares commensurate with the fact that you're not going to be able to fill those seats, go ahead and raise the fares. And I know what people are saying, yeah, that's fine, go ahead and jack up a fare by 40, 50, 60%. But if you're running an airline, it's already tough enough to convince people to fly. Now you're going to tack on, I don't know, another $100, $130 onto a ticket. Do you think people are going to want to pay that? It's tough enough right now, and they're also fighting the fact that they were designed to fill as many seats as possible. Now you're asking them to change their business model.
Yeah, the fares go up 2 times, Phil, and there'll be letters complaining about that as well, I'm sure. Phil LeBeau, yes. Thank you, in Chicago. Let's now bring in a top-ranked airline analyst, Helane Becker. She is the managing director over at Cowen. Helane, great to have you with us. I want to get your reaction, first of all, to the news that Phil brought about the letter from Peter DeFazio to the airline CEOs. If airlines had to run at 67% capacity, and we assume that they could fill every seat of that 67% capacity, what does that do to the airlines?
Thanks for having me on again, Melissa. Yeah, it's, look, they won't make money, plain and simple. They can't do that sustainably. They can do it for a few months. They can even do it a month or two without raising fares. But to Phil's point, they're going to have to raise fares, which has the effect of discouraging demand. And that would have the effect of kind of people self-limiting, and they would sell fewer tickets anyway. That would have some middle seats open. The other solution is to offer people to buy the middle seat, but you saw the reaction that got last week when Frontier Airlines did that.
Right. Karen's got a question. Karen?
I do. What about for these regional jets that have a single aisle? There is no middle seat. What is the configuration going to be for those?
Yeah, that's a good question, Karen. I don't know the answer to that. My suspicion is it's like A in this row, A and D. You know what I mean? Like 2 seats per row.
Yes.
Because I don't know how else they would do it with no middle seat.
What's the path forward, Helane, for the airlines?
So that's 50% capacity.
Yeah, that's dramatically, that's already 50%. What is the road forward in your view, Helane, for the airlines at this point? I mean, there are demands that they don't pack the planes. I mean, the business model, I don't know if the business model can even work if they don't try and pack planes. And then you got Delta cutting back pilots. I mean, what can the airlines do in this coronavirus pandemic environment to operate and remain going concerns?
Yeah, I have PTSD from that, from thinking about that. So here's my thought, and in terms of how we go forward. This is not going to last forever, number one. There are very smart people, as you guys have on your programs all day long, working on viruses and treatments and so on, and it will get resolved at some point. So that's number one. Number two, in the short term, which let's say is the next 2 to 5 years, because we've said it will take 3 to 5 years to get back to 2019 traffic levels. And, when you think about that and you think about people getting back on planes, let's just think about, the idea that first stuff has to open again, then people will want to travel. Visiting friends and relatives will come back, I think, faster. I think people want to travel and want to get out of, their homes, having been locked down for so long. You see that as states reopen. I think what's going to happen is domestic short haul comes back first, and then domestic regional as stuff opens and hotels open. And international is probably, 2 or 3 years away. You can't go to London if they're going to force you to quarantine for 14 days. So you're not going to see that international travel, and I think that's what you're hearing from Delta. And they're not the only ones. They might be the first ones out there with a plan. But, a week or so ago, you guys reported and talked about United basically having a scorched earth policy where they said something similar about the fourth quarter. They just didn't put numbers behind it. But we estimate 800 to 1,000 aircraft will be permanently parked by the end of this year, and 150,000 to 200,000 people will lose their jobs. I think the airlines are going to try to do it through voluntary means, like early retirements, things like that, as opposed to doing involuntary leaves, because that's so painful for people.
Guy, you got a question?
Yeah, Guy.
Yeah, I mean, how are you? Thanks for being here. So the Boeing CEO, Mr. Calhoun, made a comment. It was in response to a question, so I don't want to go far down this rabbit hole, but he basically said, I'm paraphrasing, one of these major carriers is going to go out of business or go bankrupt. Do you think he misspoke, or do you think there's some truth there?
No, I think there's truth there. I mean, I think that everybody, that's our concern too, of course. What we have said publicly and what we have written is that you are not going to see a bankruptcy this year because there's been money given to the airlines by the government. And, I don't call it a bailout. I know everybody does, and I do too from time to time. But I look at it as an unemployment program that's being administered by the airlines on behalf of the government, because this money isn't designed to bail out shareholders or bondholders. This money is designed to pay their employees for 6 months, when the prudent decision, if you're an airline CEO, would have been to ground as much aircraft as possible to preserve capital, and to furlough as many people as possible to preserve capital. And that's not what they're doing, and that's not what they want to do.
Yeah.
Did that answer Guy's question? I don't know.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Helane, it's always great to have you. Always great to speak with you. Thanks so much for your time. Helane Becker
Melissa.
of Cowen and Company. I think, as much as people may not want to hear that, that is the truth. Because if you are a business and nobody is buying your product, what do? You don't keep paying your workers indefinitely. You don't keep, running these airplanes. You got to conserve cash immediately, and that's not what is happening with this government bailout, loan, grant, whatever you want to call it. You're delaying the inevitable, and that's exactly what the airlines have come out and point blank said. They said, we're going to wait till the day we can lay people off to lay people off. So they are simply delaying the pain that will be felt across the industry and by the people who work at these airlines, Tim.
Yeah, I think, Mel, you nailed it right there. Also, airlines are vilified for running for profit, which is what they've done for the last 5 years as the sector's re-rated. So we have to be clear. We've wanted airlines to be more efficient and more focused. Delta will survive. And Helane talked about this. This will come back to some semblance of normal at some point. It's about who can hold through. Delta is the one you should have the most confidence. They'll have $10 billion of cash by the end of the second quarter. But Delta's been the smartest in terms of how they built their business. They're probably going to go back and target demographics, their best customers, not necessarily going for as much of the lower carrier or lower budget stuff. They're going to go for whatever is out there that's higher margin, and it may mean less flights, but it's how they've survived, and I think it will probably be the right strategy.
Steve?
Yeah, so I agree with Tim. Delta and Southwest were the only ones that entered into this with investment-grade debt across all credit rating agencies. So you have to stick there. And with our guest, the domestic flights will come back sooner than international. UAL has the biggest leverage to Asia, so I'd stay away from that side. But when you look at the domestic carriers and Delta and Southwest, those are the areas to stay. Stay with strong balance sheets and then stay with the domestic carriers. Look past this.
Right.
There will be a vaccine. There will be therapies. And eventually we will get out of this.
You know, we talk about how things may change forever in terms of behaviors. And one thing that is often talked about is how people conduct business, Karen, and in terms of meetings, not having to make that flight to wherever to have that one meeting or those three meetings. And if we are to say that things are going to change in terms of businesses, if you take that part of the equation out permanently, that is a fundamental change to the business model for the airlines that they operated under pre-pandemic.
Right. I mean, that's, a big portion of the business gone. But I think, we kind of talk about the equities and then there's the business. So an airline can go under, right? We saw it in 08 and 09, right? Auto companies went under, yet they did survive. They did restructure. They were able to continue as a business and keep people employed. So I'm hopeful that even if we see, bankruptcies, that there'll still be viable businesses there underneath, and they'll just be able to operate with less debt,
right?
But smaller, because some of that demand has gone away.
Guy, last thought here?
Listen, I mean, history is littered with disastrous outcomes born of good intentions. So that was sort of what you were alluding to earlier when you asked him that question. But in terms of the stock, which is really why we're here, I mean, Delta made a new low. It breached that March 23rd or whatever it was low, but reversed on 2 times normal volume. So if you're looking for a trade, much like JP Morgan, which we spoke about earlier, Delta really set up well today. So that's the place I would look.